She was nobody, a ghost in a penthouse full of killers. For 11 months, Lena Mercer cooked, cleaned, sanitized, cared for the mother of Chicago's most feared mafia boss, and not one man in that building ever learned her last name. Then one gray Tuesday morning, she asked a single question about a changed convoy route. That question saved 8 lives, and it cost her 5 bullets. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or treated like you don't exist, stay until the very end of this story. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. Tavas! The alarm did not wake Lena Mercer so much as drag her back into consciousness the way cold water drags a drowning woman back to the surface, violent, unwelcome, and without ceremony. 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to go off, which meant she had been lying awake for the better part of an hour, staring at a water stain on the ceiling of her studio apartment on the south side of Chicago, running numbers in her head that never, under any combination of hours worked or expenses cut, came out clean. She sat up. The radiator knocked twice against the baseboard like it was registering a complaint. Outside, November pressed itself flat against the window glass. No snow yet, just the particular gray that Chicago reserves for the weeks before Thanksgiving, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself but simply settles in and refuses to leave. She dressed in the dark out of habit, though there was no one to wake. The apartment held a single bed, a pressed wood dresser with a stuck bottom drawer, a kitchenette where one burner worked reliably, and a framed photograph on the windowsill that she did not look at. Every morning, the way people in movies look at photographs. She looked at it the way you check a wound, quickly, deliberately, and with a very specific kind of hope that things haven't gotten worse overnight. The photograph was of her brother, Marcus, 26 years old in the picture. He'd been 22 when the accident happened, and 4 years of rehabilitation facilities, surgical follow-ups, and outpatient physical therapy had not returned him to the man in that photograph, so much as they had produced a different man, quieter, slower, more careful with his words, which their mother would have said was an improvement if their mother had still been alive to say anything at all. She was not. Lena pulled on her coat, checked her phone. No messages from Hartwell Recovery Center, which was the only metric she allowed herself to use when measuring whether a night had been acceptable or catastrophic, and walked out into the hallway, where the fluorescent light above the stairwell had been flickering since August, and management had twice promised and twice failed to replace it. She took the 6:02 bus north. The Moreau penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a converted Streeterville high-rise that had been luxury condominiums in a previous life, and was now, by every observable indicator, something considerably more complicated. The building had a doorman who never smiled, a security desk staffed by men whose jackets fit the way jackets fit when the person wearing them expects to need their arms free on short notice, and a private elevator bank that required both a key card and a code that changed every 72 hours. Lena had worked here for 11 months. She had memorized 4 rotating codes, the preferred breakfast temperature of an 81-year-old woman who had survived 2 strokes and outlasted 3 of her husband's rivals, and the precise pharmaceutical schedule that kept that woman's heart beating with something approaching regularity. What she had not memorized, because she had never been given cause to learn it, was the name of a single security professional in the building. They did not introduce themselves to her. She was the caregiver. She arrived, she worked, she left. The men with the fitted jackets moved around her the way water moves around a stone, not because she was immovable, but because she was simply not a factor that required navigation. Vivienne Moreau was awake when Lena arrived, which was not unusual. The old woman slept in 90-minute intervals now, her rest fractured and shallow, and she had developed the habit of sitting in the chair beside the east-facing window to watch whatever Chicago offered in the pre-dawn hours, which was usually garbage trucks and the particular amber loneliness of streetlights going off one by one as the sky lightened. "You're early," Vivienne said without turning around. "Bus was fast. Buses are never fast. You couldn't sleep either." Lena set her bag down and moved to the medication cart, checking the morning tray against the printed schedule. "I slept fine." Lena. Mrs. Moreau. The old woman made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but occupied the same territory. She was small in the chair. She had always been small, Lena suspected, but age had compacted her further, tightening everything down to its essential form, the way prolonged pressure turned soft material to something harder and more permanent. Her hands rested in her lap with the deliberate stillness of someone who had learned a very long time ago that stillness communicated authority more effectively than movement. "My son is coming at 9, Vivian said. Lena's hands did not stop moving over the medication tray. "I'll make sure the morning routine is finished by 8:30. He'll want a security review. He has them every 2 weeks now." A pause. "Since Carver." She didn't elaborate on Carver. She rarely did. Lena had learned in 11 months that names dropped without context in this household were names attached to events that had already been processed by everyone present and required no further narration. She filled in the gaps with inference and left them unfilled when inference felt dangerous. "I'll stay out of the way," Lena said. "Of course you will," Vivian said, and there was nothing unkind in it, which somehow made it worse. Damien Moreau arrived at 8:53. Which Lena knew because she heard the elevator open from the kitchen where she was washing the breakfast dishes by hand, even though the penthouse had a functioning dishwasher, because the noise of the dishwasher made it harder to track movement through the apartment, and she had learned gradually, and without anyone teaching her, that tracking movement in this apartment was a useful skill. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, because he was not speaking yet, but the change in the building's atmospheric pressure that seemed to accompany his arrival, the way the men in fitted jackets straightened almost imperceptibly, and conversations in the outer rooms concluded themselves with a speed that suggested they had never truly been comfortable beginning. He was 41 years old. She knew this from his mother's occasional references to his childhood, cross-referenced against the rare moments when the penthouse staff spoke about him in her presence, which they generally did not. He was taller than she had expected the first time she saw him, which had been 3 weeks after she started, and which he had not acknowledged in any way. Dark hair gone slightly gray at the temples, eyes the precise color of deep water in winter, which she was aware was a romantic way to describe eyes belonging to a man who ran the most significant criminal organization in the city of Chicago, but accuracy required she noted anyway. She heard him moving through the living room, heard Vivian's voice, warmer than usual, the specific warmth reserved for people you have loved for so long. The love has stopped being a feeling and become instead a structural feature of how you move through the world. Then a male voice she didn't recognize, speaking in the measured cadences of someone delivering a briefing, route options, staffing allocations, a transfer scheduled for the following week. Vivian's health had declined enough in the past month that the medical team had recommended a period of recovery at a secured estate property outside the city. The transfer had been discussed for 2 weeks. The logistics apparently were still being finalized. Lena finished the dishes and was drying her hands when he walked into the kitchen. He did not acknowledge her presence for approximately 45 seconds, during which time he poured himself coffee from the carafe she had prepared, examined the medication schedule she had printed and left on the counter as she did every morning, and read something on his phone with an expression that communicated nothing. Then he looked up. "How long has she been on the Cardivex at this dosage?" Lena set down the dish towel. 6 weeks. Her cardiologist adjusted it after the second event. Side effects. Some fatigue in the afternoons. She manages it. He looked back at his phone. The fatigue affects the transfer schedule. She can't be in a vehicle for more than 90 minutes without a rest stop. I know. I've already flagged that with the logistics team. A pause that lasted long enough to be intentional. He looked at her again. Not the way someone looks at a person, exactly. More the way someone looks at a piece of furniture they are trying to determine whether to keep or discard. "You flagged it with the logistics team." "Yes." "Which member?" Reeves. He has the medical accommodation protocol on file now." Something moved across his face that she could not read. He looked back at his phone without responding, and she understood that the conversation was over, and she picked up the dish towel again and folded it precisely over the oven handle and moved toward the door. "Mercer?" She stopped. "If you have concerns about my mother's care, you bring them to Dr. Ashby, not to my logistics staff." She turned around. He was still looking at his phone. "Dr. Ashby isn't coordinating the transfer," she said. "That's not your determination to make." "No," she agreed. "It's yours. I just made sure the information was available to the people planning the route." She paused. "Sir?" The word landed slightly wrong, and they both heard it. He looked up from his phone. His expression had not changed. It was the absence of expression, she had come to understand, that meant something was being actively suppressed. The caregiver doesn't talk to security. The caregiver doesn't talk to logistics. The caregiver cares. He held her gaze for exactly long enough to ensure the instruction had registered. That's what you're paid for. She nodded once and left the kitchen. The security review took 2 hours. She spent it in Vivian's bedroom, helping the old woman through the morning physical therapy routine that the physiotherapist had outlined, and that Vivian performed with the specific grim cooperation of someone who understands the alternative is not acceptable. They did not discuss Damien. They discussed, briefly and obliquely, a television program Vivian had been watching, and then they discussed Marcus, because Vivian always eventually asked about Marcus, and Lena answered the way she always answered, accurately but incompletely, describing his progress without describing the cost of his progress, which had been, over 4 years, approximately everything Lena Mercer had. She had been 23 when their mother died. Marcus had been 19. The car accident that took their mother had also fractured Marcus's spine, and the surgery that followed had saved his ability to walk, but introduced a dependency on prescription opioids that the rehabilitation system had spent 3 years attempting to address with varying degrees of success and a consistent degree of expense. Lena had deferred nursing school twice, then declined the admission entirely and accepted instead a series of private caregiving positions that paid better than hospital work and required her to be present in ways that made her own absence from her own life easier to rationalize. She had saved approximately $18,000 before her previous employer, an elderly attorney on the North Shore whose family had thanked her with a generic gift card and 3 weeks severance, died without notice or warning on a Wednesday afternoon in March. The Moreau position had come through an agency 2 weeks later. She had not asked questions about the employer. She had not, in 11 months, asked questions about the employer. The security review concluded. She heard the elevator. She heard the particular quiet that followed Damien Moreau's departure, the way sound re-expanded into spaces he had just vacated. She was reorganizing the medication cart when Vivian appeared in the doorway of her own sitting room, which was unusual. The old woman generally waited to be helped from one room to another, not out of incapacity but out of a preference for ceremony that Lena had come to appreciate. "He was rude to you," Vivian said. "He was clear." "Damien is always clear. That's not the same thing as not being rude." The old woman moved to her chair slowly, one hand trailing along the wall. Not for support, Lena had decided, but out of some instinct toward contact with solid things. "He doesn't see you. Most people don't." "I do," Vivian said, and sat down, and the morning continued. 3 days later, the convoy logistics for Vivian's transfer were finalized and distributed. Lena received the summary because she was listed as primary medical attendant, which meant she would be riding in the second vehicle, a modified SUV with a medical equipment bay, directly behind the primary armored car carrying Vivian and 2 security personnel. She read the route summary twice in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold beside her. Then she read it a third time. The route filed 3 days ago had taken Lakeshore Drive north to the highway interchange at Foster, then cut west. The route on the document in front of her took Michigan Avenue north through the Gold Coast, then turned at Division, then connected to the expressway from a different entrance entirely. She turned the paper over as if there might be an explanation on the back. There was not. She set it down, picked up her coffee, set it down again. There were reasons to change a convoy route. Security protocols sometimes required last-minute alterations. She understood that. She was not naive about the operational logic of the household she worked in. Route changes for high-value protective transport were standard procedure. She was also someone who had spent 11 months watching this household operate, and in 11 months she had learned that the security team documented every alteration to a protected route with an accompanying authorization code and a named sign-off. The document in front of her had neither. She sat with this for a very long time. She thought about the kitchen, about the way he had looked at her. The caregiver doesn't talk to security. The caregiver doesn't talk to logistics. The caregiver cares. She thought about the agency coordinator who had placed her in this position, who had told her during the intake interview that discretion was the primary qualification and that employees who exceeded their defined role did not tend to retain their positions. She thought about Marcus, about Hartwell, about the payment schedule that ran through the following April, and the contingency plan she did not have if this job ended before then. She put the route summary in her bag. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and ran through every alternative explanation she could construct, and by 3 a.m. she had constructed several that were plausible, and by 4 a.m. she had taken them apart one by one, and by 5 a.m. she had accepted what she already knew, which was that the absence of an authorization code was not an oversight. Someone had changed this route quietly, deliberately, and without leaving a paper trail. The transfer was in 6 hours. She thought about saying nothing. She was genuinely capable of imagining that version of the morning, getting on the bus, arriving at the penthouse, riding in the second vehicle, keeping her eyes on Vivian's vitals and her mouth shut about everything else. She could see it clearly. She could feel how much easier it would be. She thought about Vivian in her chair at the east window, watching the streetlights go out. She thought about a woman who had survived 2 strokes and 3 of her husband's rivals, and the slow erosion of her own body, and who had looked at Lena Mercer, invisible, irrelevant, classified as furniture, and said simply, "I do." Lena got up, dressed in the dark, and reached for her phone. The call she needed to make required a number she had never called and was not supposed to have. She had it because she was someone who paid attention to things, and 8 months ago she had heard it spoken aloud once in the kitchen when 2 security personnel were coordinating shift coverage, and she had written it on the inside cover of the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket because she was fundamentally someone who believed that information was its own kind of insurance. She dialed. It rang 4 times. A man's voice, flat and alert despite the hour. "Who is this?" "My name is Lena Mercer. I'm Mrs. Moreau's caregiver. I need to speak to whoever is responsible for authorizing the transfer route today. The document I received has no authorization code and no named sign-off, and the route is different from the one filed 3 days ago." Silence. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important right now." "It's very important." "Less important than the route." She looked at the water stain on the ceiling. "I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong, but if I'm not wrong and something happens to her because I didn't say anything, I'll have to live with that. So I'm saying something. What you do with it is your decision." The line was quiet for long enough that she thought he had disconnected. Then, "Don't go anywhere." 22 minutes later, someone knocked on her apartment door, and Lena Mercer, nobody, invisible, a ghost in a penthouse full of killers, opened it to find 2 men in fitted jackets looking at her with an expression she had not seen directed at her face before. Not dismissal, not the mild, reflexive categorization of someone deemed irrelevant, something closer to assessment, something that looked uncomfortably like the first stages of being seen. She didn't know yet what that would cost her. The 2 men did not introduce themselves. That was the first thing Lena noticed. Not their size, not the identical cut of their jackets, not the way they filled the doorway of her apartment with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to filling doorways. It was the absence of names. They existed in the functional anonymity of the organization they represented, and they looked at her the way she had seen people look at evidence, with careful, impersonal attention that had nothing to do with her as a person and everything to do with what she might mean. "Get your coat," the one on the left said. She already had it on. They took her down the back stairwell rather than the front elevator, which told her something about how they wanted this handled, and they put her in the back of a black SUV idling in the alley behind her building, and the one on the left got in beside her while the one on the right took the passenger seat up front, and nobody spoke during the 17-minute drive north. She watched the city through the window. Chicago at 6 in the morning had a specific quality of light, flat, honest, unimpressed with itself, that she had always found easier to tolerate than the performed energy of midday. Delivery trucks. A woman walking a dog that was too large for the leash. A produce vendor pulling a cart across an intersection with the slow, grinding momentum of someone who understood that the day was going to be long and had organized himself accordingly. Ordinary. Persistent. Continuing regardless of what was happening inside a black SUV moving through its streets. The penthouse security floor was 2 levels below the residential penthouse itself. A staging area she had never been in. All exposed concrete and recessed lighting and the kind of utilitarian blankness that suggested the room had been designed for function rather than habitation. There were monitors along one wall, a table with chairs that didn't match, a large printed map of the city's north side pinned to a corkboard, with 2 routes marked in different colors. 3 men were already in the room when she arrived. She recognized one of them, Reeves, the logistics coordinator she had flagged the medical accommodation protocol with 2 weeks ago. He did not look pleased to see her, which she had expected. The second man she did not recognize. The third was Damien Moreau. He was standing at the corkboard with his back partially to her, one hand in his jacket pocket and the other holding a coffee cup he wasn't drinking from. He turned when she came in. His face in the fluorescent light of the staging area looked like it had been assembled from harder materials than usual. Jaw tight, the line of his mouth compressed into something that communicated precisely nothing. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He looked at the man she didn't recognize, mid-50s, heavy through the shoulders, a graying beard trimmed with the kind of military precision that suggested the habit had outlasted whatever institution had instilled it. "This is her?" "Yes." Damien set his coffee cup on the table. He pulled out the chair across from Lena and sat, and the act of sitting was itself somehow a statement of containment, the deliberate folding of something large into a smaller, more controlled posture. "Walk me through it," he said. She did. She kept it factual and sequential. The route summary received the previous afternoon, the discrepancy from the filed route, the absence of authorization code and named sign-off. She did not editorialize. She did not say "I think" or "I believe" or "I could be wrong," though she had said all three in her head between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. She laid it out the way you lay out a medication schedule, precisely, without sentiment, in the order that the information needed to be received. When she finished, the room was quiet for 4 seconds. Then Reeves said, "The route was changed by my team. I sent the update summary yesterday at 4:17. Lena looked at him. "Without an authorization code. We were under a time constraint. Your own protocol requires an authorization code on every route modification for a protected transfer." She kept her voice level. "That's not my protocol. That's yours. It's in the document you gave me when I was added to the transfer manifest." Reeves's jaw tightened. He looked at Damien rather than at her, which she understood. In rooms like this, arguments were resolved by directing them toward the person whose word constituted resolution. "She's a caregiver. She's reading our internal security protocol like it's a checklist she's qualified to evaluate." "She's right about the authorization code," the heavy-shouldered man said. He had not moved from his position near the wall. His voice was the unhurried voice of someone who spoke infrequently and expected to be heard when he did. "I'm looking at the transfer summary right now. There's no code. There's no sign-off." Reeves opened his mouth and closed it again. Damien had not looked away from Lena during any of this. "Who changed the route?" he said to Reeves. The statement arrived without inflection, which she was beginning to understand was more frightening than anger. "I told you." "My team." "Which member of your team?" A pause that lasted 1 second too long. "I'd need to check the system log." "Check it." Reeves moved to the monitors. The room held its breath in the particular way rooms hold their breath, when everyone present understands that what is about to be discovered will change the shape of the next several hours. Lena sat with her hands flat on her thighs and kept her breathing even and watched Damien Moreau's face and learned nothing from it because it continued to communicate nothing. Reeves stood at the monitor for 40 seconds. Then he said, "The log shows the modification was entered from a terminal in sub-level 2. Authorized user ID is Carver 9. The name dropped into the room like something heavy dropped from a significant height. She felt the impact of it, even though she didn't know what it meant. Saw it register across the faces of the men who did. Saw Damien's expression undergo the specific controlled shift of a man receiving information he had partially anticipated and finds no comfort in the confirmation of. Carver 9 was deactivated, the heavy-shouldered man said. Quiet. Very quiet. Yes, Reeves said. 6 weeks ago. Yes. Damien stood up. He did it the way he sat down, with a quality of deliberateness that had nothing to do with slowness and everything to do with the management of something large and pressurized. He looked at the corkboard. He looked at the 2 routes marked in different colors. He picked up a pen from the table and circled the intersection where the new route turned at Division Street. Pull the surveillance on that block, he said to the heavy-shouldered man. Everything from the last 72 hours. Already running it. Damien looked at Lena. She held the look without moving. The transfer is in 4 hours, he said. I know. If the surveillance shows what I think it shows, we're not taking either route. Okay. He studied her for a moment with the expression of someone attempting to locate the category into which a thing belongs and finding that the available categories are insufficient. You can go. She stood up, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. Mercer. She stopped. She was developing a complicated relationship with hearing her own name in his voice. Yes. How did you get Kowalski's number? He didn't indicate which of the men was Kowalski, but she understood it was the one who had answered her call at 5 a.m. She considered the question. She considered several versions of the answer. I pay attention, she said, and left. The convoy was delayed 3 hours while Damien's security team pulled surveillance footage from Division Street and the 2-block radius surrounding the proposed route change. Lena spent those 3 hours in Vivian's suite on the residential floor, helping the old woman pack the specific items she insisted on traveling with: a particular cardigan, a photograph in a silver frame, a small velvet bag of correspondence she had never allowed Lena to see inside, while the old woman watched her with the measuring patience of someone who understands that a great deal is happening around her and has decided to wait for the relevant portions to surface on their own. You look like you haven't slept, Vivian said. I slept enough. That's not the same as sleeping. No, Lena agreed, wrapping the silver frame in a soft cloth. It's not. Damien spoke to you this morning. It wasn't a question. Lena set the frame in the travel bag carefully, making sure it was cushioned on all sides. He did. And I told him what I found. And the security team is doing what security teams do. She moved to the medication organizer, double-checking the travel case against the printed schedule. You should rest before the transfer. The drive is going to take at least 2 hours with stops. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then, are we safe? The question arrived simply, without decoration, the way important questions arrive when they're asked by someone who has spent a lifetime watching men answer them with performance rather than honesty. Lena looked up from the medication case. I think so, she said. I think the right people know the right things now. She paused. I'm going to be in the vehicle directly behind yours. I'll have eyes on your car the whole time. The old woman nodded once, slowly, with the particular quality of trust that doesn't make any claims about certainty, just registers that it has been offered and accepted. At 9:47, a security analyst named Petra, who had the economical vocabulary of someone who considered language primarily a delivery system for data, presented the surveillance findings to Damien and the senior security personnel in the sub-level staging area. Lena was not in the room. She heard about it 40 minutes later from Kowalski, who appeared in the hallway outside Vivian's suite and spoke to her in the low, precisely metered tones of a man delivering information he has been authorized to deliver, and not a syllable more. The surveillance footage had shown 3 vehicles conducting slow, overlapping drive-bys of the Division Street intersection over a 48-hour period. 2 of the vehicles had been traced to a logistics company registered to a shell entity with documented connections to the Vasquez Syndicate, the organization that had been applying escalating pressure to Moreau operations across the North Side for the better part of 6 months. The 3rd vehicle had not yet been traced. The planned ambush point, Petra had assessed, was the construction zone at the Division and Clark intersection, where lane closures had been in effect for 11 days, and traffic was routed into a single-lane corridor with no viable secondary exit for approximately 400 meters. The convoy, slowed by the corridor, would have been held stationary for an estimated 40 to 60 seconds. Long enough. Kowalski told her all of this in 40 seconds. Then he said, Mr. Moreau wants you on the transfer. New route, different vehicle rotation. When do we leave? 30 minutes. She nodded. He started to turn away. Kowalski. He stopped. The deactivated user ID that modified the route. Carver 9. She kept her voice low and her eyes on the mid-distance, the way you keep your eyes when you're asking a question you're not sure you're entitled to ask. Carver was a person. A pause. Yes. Was. Another pause. He's dead. Has been for 6 weeks. He looked at her steadily. Somebody used his credentials from inside this building. She let that sit. Someone on the inside, she said. Someone on the inside, he confirmed, and walked away. The next 90 minutes were a specific kind of controlled tension she had no prior framework for. Not the tension of emergency medicine, which she understood from her caregiving work, not the tension of financial crisis, which she understood from the past 4 years. This was operational tension, the kind generated by a large number of people moving with deliberate efficiency toward a specific objective, while simultaneously accommodating the possibility that the objective might not be achievable in the way it had been planned. Vehicles were repositioned. Personnel assignments were reshuffled. A new route was drawn and authenticated with 3 separate sign-offs and distributed on paper rather than electronically. She rode in the 3rd vehicle this time. The modification to her position had been communicated to her by Reeves, who delivered it without looking at her and left before she could respond. And she understood that Reeves was a man currently experiencing the specific discomfort of having been wrong in front of people whose opinion of him carried operational consequences. The convoy moved out at 11:20. 4 vehicles, lead security, primary armored transport carrying Vivian and 2 senior personnel, medical SUV with Lena and a paramedic named Dario, who smelled faintly of cigarettes and had the settled, unworried competence of someone who had done this kind of work for a very long time, and a trailing security vehicle. They took the new route, east to the lake, north along the Shore Drive corridor, then the highway interchange as originally filed 3 days ago. She watched the city through the window. She watched the primary transport 2 vehicles ahead of her. She watched the mirrors. She did not talk to Dario, and he did not talk to her, and the silence between them was the professional silence of 2 people who understand that conversation during an active operation is a luxury allocated only to moments that can afford the distraction. They were 40 minutes out from the estate when her phone buzzed. An internal communication channel, the transfer coordination app that had been installed on her phone when she was added to the manifest. A message from a sender listed only by an operational code she didn't recognize. The message said, "Check the lead vehicle's 3rd wheel well, right rear." She stared at the message. She read it twice, 3 times. She looked up at the back of Dario's head. "I need to reach Kowalski." Dario reached for the radio without asking why. She appreciated this more than she could have articulated in the moment. He raised Kowalski in 11 seconds. She read him the message, verbatim. The channel ID, the text, the timestamp. The radio was silent for 6 seconds. Then Kowalski's voice, very flat, very controlled. "Do not change speed. Do not alter spacing. Tell Dario to stay in lane." "Kowalski, we're pulling over in 3 minutes. There's a maintenance access point at the next overpass. We go there. Nobody moves until I say." She lowered the radio handset and looked out through the windshield at the primary transport moving steadily ahead of them at 62 miles per hour, with Vivian Moreau inside it, and whatever was in the right rear wheel well ticking away in the cold November air. And the thing she felt in that moment was not panic. She had processed panic into something quieter and less useful over 4 years of crises that required action rather than feeling, but a very specific, very clear-edged understanding that she was no longer a caregiver who had made an inconvenient observation at an inconvenient hour. She had walked through a door she had not fully seen until she was already on the other side of it. When the convoy pulled into the maintenance access bay beneath the overpass and the bomb disposal technician, already en route, Kowalski told her afterward, because, after the Division Street intelligence, they had pulled 2 additional protocols into the transfer, opened the right rear wheel well of the lead security vehicle, and found the device that had been placed there sometime in the previous 12 hours. Lena sat in the medical SUV with her hands flat on her thighs and her breathing measured and even, and she thought, someone inside this building put that there. Not the Vasquez syndicate, not an outside contractor. Someone who had access to the vehicle bay, access to the fleet, access to the scheduling that told them which vehicle was running lead on this specific transfer, on this specific morning. Someone who was, in all probability, still inside the building they had just left. Her phone buzzed again. Same unrecognized channel. This message had no text, only an image, a photograph, slightly blurred, taken from what appeared to be an interior hallway. She could see the edge of a door she recognized, the door to the sub-level staging area. She could see the corkboard with its 2 routes marked in different colors. She could see a figure standing at the corkboard with a phone raised, photographing the new route. The figure was Reeves. She stared at the photograph for the 4 seconds it took her to be absolutely certain of what she was seeing, and then she got out of the vehicle into the cold air under the overpass and walked directly to where Damien Moreau was standing with Kowalski and the bomb disposal lead, and she held the phone up in front of him without saying a word. He looked at the photograph. His face did not change. His breathing did not change. He looked at it for approximately 3 seconds, which was long enough for a man who processed information the way he processed it, and then he looked at Kowalski. "Find him," he said. Kowalski already had his phone to his ear. Damien looked back at Lena. She was still holding her phone up between them, arm extended, like an offering or a piece of evidence, and she was aware that her hand was not entirely steady, and she did not try to make it so. He reached out and took the phone from her hand. His fingers closed around it briefly, and she felt the warmth of them against the backs of her fingers before he pulled away. And the contact lasted less than a second and registered with the disproportionate clarity of small physical details absorbed during moments of extreme stress. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way he had looked at her in the kitchen 3 days ago. Not the furniture assessment, not the managed dismissal. Something else. Something that had not yet resolved itself into an expression she could name. "You're going to need to tell me," he said, "everything you know about where that message came from." "I don't know where it came from," she said. "I've never seen that channel ID before." "Someone sent it to you specifically." "Not to Kowalski, not to me. To the caregiver's phone." His voice was careful now, the careful of someone building an argument brick by brick in real time. "Which means someone knew you were paying attention. Someone knew you were already looking." She had not considered this. She considered it now, in the cold under the overpass with the smell of exhaust and lake air, and the particular metallic undertone that she suspected was the device in its containment bag. And the thing that consideration produced was not reassurance. Someone had been watching her watch. Someone inside this organization had been monitoring her, had assessed her as an asset, had used her without her knowledge or consent as a delivery mechanism for information they needed to get to the right people without surfacing themselves. She had not prevented an ambush by accident. She had been used, deliberately, precisely, by someone who understood this household better than she did, to prevent it. She looked at Damien. "Someone inside your organization is working against Reeves," she said slowly. "Someone who knew Reeves was dirty and couldn't surface it directly, so they surfaced it through me." The silence under the overpass had a different quality from the silence in the staging room that morning. That silence had been anticipatory. This one was the silence that follows a detonation, the moment after the noise when the full scope of the damage is still being inventoried. "Yes," Damien said. He handed her phone back to her. "And now I need to know who." She took the phone. She looked at the unrecognized channel ID. She thought about a dead man's credentials used to modify a route from inside a building. She thought about 2 conflicting betrayals operating simultaneously in the same organization, one trying to get Vivian Moreau killed and one trying to stop it. And both of them, for reasons she did not yet understand, running their operations through the woman nobody in this building had ever bothered to see. Her hands had stopped shaking. She looked up at Damien Moreau in the gray November light under a Chicago overpass, with a bomb in a bag 20 feet away and a traitor still walking free in his building, and she said the thing she had been not saying since 5 a.m., the thing she had known since she looked at the water stain on her ceiling and understood that she had already made the only decision she was capable of making. "Then I guess," she said, "you'd better start telling me things you don't usually tell caregivers." Damien did not take her back to the penthouse. He took her to a location she had no name for, a converted warehouse space on the near west side that presented itself to the street as a commercial printing company and contained, behind its front offices and their convincing clutter of paper stock and industrial equipment, a series of interior rooms that had been purpose-built for conversations that required no witnesses and no record. The walls were thick, the lighting was recessed and shadowless. The furniture was minimal and functional in the way that furniture is minimal and functional when the people using it are not thinking about furniture. She sat at a table that had seen considerable use. Across from her, Damien sat with his jacket off for the first time she had ever observed, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, a legal pad in front of him that he had not written on yet. Kowalski stood near the door. Petra, the surveillance analyst, had a laptop open on a secondary table against the wall and was working with the focused silence of someone who communicates exclusively through results. "Start from the beginning," Damien said, "not the route. Before the route. Everything you've noticed in 11 months that you didn't think was your business to mention." She looked at him. "That's a long list." "I have time." She started talking. She talked for 40 minutes. She talked about the shift pattern she had observed among the security personnel, the specific rotations, the gaps, The two occasions she had noticed a man she did not recognize in the vehicle bay on sublevels when the bay should have been restricted to credentialed staff. She talked about a phone conversation she had overheard fragments of 8 months ago in the kitchen corridor, which she had filed away as operational noise she was not meant to process, in which a voice she now identified as Reeves had used the phrase clean transfer in a context that had not made sense given the household's standard transfer protocol. She talked about a pattern she had observed in Vivian's medication delivery. Twice in the past 3 months, the pharmacy delivery had arrived 30 minutes early before the security desk had logged the expected arrival, which meant someone had given the pharmacy a modified delivery window without updating the building log. Damien wrote on the legal pad. He wrote in compressed economical strokes, the handwriting of someone for whom notation is a tool and not a performance. He did not interrupt her. He did not affirm or deny. He listened the way people listen when they are genuinely alarmed by the quantity of what they are hearing. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Kowalski said from the door, "The pharmacy delivery anomaly is a known Vasquez insertion method. They used it on the Pelletier family in Detroit 18 months ago, modified the delivery window, substituted a package in transit. The substituted package contained a listening device." Lena looked at him. She looked at Damien. "You're telling me Vivian's suite may have been compromised?" "We swept it 6 weeks ago," Damien said, "after Carver died." "Yes. Did you sweep it before that?" A pause. 1 second. 2. She watched him decide whether to answer honestly and watched honesty win, which surprised her. "No," he said. She thought about 11 months of conversations in Vivian's suite. She thought about the things she and Vivian had discussed, the medication schedules, the transfer logistics, the names of the security personnel Vivian had mentioned in passing. She thought about a woman sitting in a chair by an east window talking, because she was lonely and because Lena was the only person in the building who talked back to her like a person rather than a principal. "Then they know everything she told me," Lena said. "And they know everything I said back." Damien looked at the legal pad. "What did you say back?" She thought carefully. She thought about 8 months of early mornings and medication routines, and the specific intimacy of caring for someone's body when their body is failing them, and all the conversation that fills that intimacy, because silence in that context is too heavy to sustain for long. "I told her about Marcus," she said. "His facility, his progress, some of the financial details." She stopped. "I told her which bus I took." The room absorbed this. "They know your brother's location," Kowalski said. Not a question. The floor of her stomach dropped approximately 3 inches. She felt it physically. A displacement of something internal, the body's honest response to a threat it has just fully comprehended. She looked at her hands on the table. She made them still. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way she had taught herself to breathe during the first year after her mother died, when breathing had been something that required active management rather than passive function. "They know his location," she said. "It's a leverage point," Petra said from the secondary table. She said it without looking up from her laptop, with the clean, affectless delivery of someone who deals in threat assessments so routinely that the emotional valence of them has been worn smooth. Standard syndicate playbook. You surface as an asset, they apply pressure through proximity to something you can't afford to lose. Lena looked at her. "When you say leverage point, I mean, they may have already moved on it." Petra looked up. Her eyes were gray and entirely without comfort, not from cruelty, but from the professional habit of delivering information without the insulation of false reassurance. "Or they may be holding it. Depends on how they're valuing you as an asset right now, and whether surfacing as Damien's source has changed that calculation." Lena pushed back from the table. "I need to call the facility." "Not from your phone," Kowalski said immediately. "Then get me another phone." "Lena." Damien's voice was not loud. It was not soft either. It occupied the register of someone who needs to be heard without raising the temperature of the room further. "Sit down." "My brother, I have 2 people already moving toward Hartwell." He held her gaze. "They left 4 minutes ago. Your brother is not going to be touched." He said this with the specific weight of a man who understands that a promise made in this context carries a different order of obligation than ordinary speech. "Sit down." She sat. She did not feel reassured. She felt the specific fury of someone who has just discovered that the geography of their private life, the carefully maintained separation between the world they inhabit professionally and the person they are protecting, has been violated without their knowledge and has been violated for months. She thought about every morning she had arrived at the penthouse, every conversation she had allowed herself to have, every small detail she had offered in the natural course of caring for an elderly woman who was lonely and sharp and genuinely interested in the texture of other people's lives. She had been careful about so many things. She had not been careful about this, because she had not known there was anything here to be careful about, which was the specific kind of not knowing that no amount of vigilance could have prevented, and that felt, regardless, like a failure of the most personal kind. Damien was watching her with an expression she could not yet read. Something measuring, something that had shifted from the pure operational focus of the past 3 hours into a register she didn't have a clean name for. The anonymous channel that sent you the wheel-well photograph, Petra said. I've traced the origin point. It's a burner relay through 3 intermediary nodes, but the originating device pinged a cell tower on the near north side at the time of transmission. She turned the laptop toward the table. On the screen was a map with a single marked location. That tower services a 4-block radius. One of those blocks contains a parking structure on Huron Street that Moreau Security uses for vehicle overflow. Damien looked at the map for 3 seconds. Someone in our own vehicle pool. Someone with access to it, not necessarily staff. Petra turned the laptop back. The Vasquez Syndicate has been running an infiltration operation against Moreau infrastructure for approximately 8 months. We've confirmed 3 points of penetration: the Logistics Coordination Desk, Reeves, the Pharmacy Delivery Protocol, and now potentially the vehicle pool. What we haven't confirmed is the internal counter-operation. She paused. Someone inside this building has been actively working against the Vasquez infiltration. They surfaced the wheel-well device. They surfaced the route modification. They used Mercer as a conduit for both. Why Mercer? Damien said. He was not asking her. He was thinking aloud, which she was beginning to understand was a thing he did rarely, and only in rooms he considered secure. Because I'm nobody, Lena said. Both Petra and Kowalski looked at her. I'm the caregiver. I don't show up in operational assessments. I'm not on anyone's threat matrix. If you're running a counter-operation inside an infiltrated organization, you need a conduit that the infiltrators aren't watching. She looked at Damien. They were watching your security team. They were watching logistics. They weren't watching me because nobody watches the caregiver. She paused. Until I called Kowalski at 5 in the morning, and now everyone's watching me. The room held the weight of this. Which means, Kowalski said slowly, that whoever was running the counter-operation through you has just lost their cover conduit, and the Vasquez people now know that the route modification was surfaced and the device was found, which means they're going to move faster, Damien said. Yes, and whoever has been working against them internally is now exposed, potentially. If the Vasquez people can identify who sent those messages to Mercer, yes. Lena looked at the table. She looked at the legal pad with Damien's compressed handwriting on it. She thought about the anonymous channel. She thought about someone inside this building who had known she was paying attention, who had assessed her and decided she was the safest available vector for information that needed to move without detection. Someone who had watched her for months the way she had watched everything else, quietly, from a position of apparent irrelevance, from a place so far outside anyone's field of attention that observation itself became invisible. Someone like her. I need to know something, she said. Damien waited. The counter-operation, the person running it, feeding me information through the anonymous channel, using me to surface the infiltration. She looked at him directly. Did you know about it? A pause. No, he said. Are you certain? His jaw tightened. Yes. Because if someone inside your organization has been running an unsanctioned counterintelligence operation for months without your knowledge, using an unauthorized conduit, that person either trusted you enough to protect what they were doing by keeping you unaware of it, or they didn't trust you at all. She held his gaze. Those are very different situations. He looked at her for a long moment. The something in his expression moved again, shifted into a territory she had not observed before on this face, something that she would have described, if pressed, as the controlled acknowledgement of a point that has landed exactly where it was aimed. Yes, he said. They are. Petra's laptop emitted a notification sound. Petra looked at the screen. Her posture changed in a way that communicated something before her voice did. A subtle tightening, a stillness that arrived ahead of the words. Reeves is in the wind, she said. Security team arrived at his registered address 18 minutes ago. Apartment cleared out, cars gone. Phone last pinged the Eisenhower at the I-290 interchange 43 minutes ago. That was while we were still at the overpass. Damien did not move. He knew we'd pull surveillance. He had a window. He used it. What else? Petra's eyes moved across the screen. Then she stopped. Whatever she was reading required 2 full seconds of processing before she spoke, which was longer than anything else had required. Hartwell Recovery Center, she said. 40 minutes ago, a man presented at the front desk with a patient welfare referral form. Claimed to be a caseworker from the county health office. She looked up. He asked for Marcus Mercer's current room assignment. The sound Lena made was not a word. It was the compressed, involuntary exhalation of someone who has just absorbed a physical blow, and she felt it through her whole chest, felt the air leave her and take something else with it, some last remaining layer of the insulation that had been keeping her functional through the past 6 hours. She was on her feet before she had decided to stand. My people are already there, Damien said sharply. Lena, is he safe? Her voice was not her voice. It was the voice of someone stripped down to the single question that matters. Is Marcus safe right now? Yes or no? Petra was already on the phone. Damien stood. Kowalski moved from the door. 31 seconds. She counted them in the specific, granular way that time passes when its passage is the only variable that matters. Petra lowered the phone. Our people arrived before the caseworker gained access to patient records. The caseworker was detained in the lobby. He's not a county employee. She paused. Marcus is in his room. He's fine. Lena put both hands on the table and leaned on them and breathed. The caseworker, Damien said to Petra. Who sent him? He's not talking yet. He will. She looked at Damien. He was standing now, jacket still off, the legal pad in his hand, and whatever had been suppressed behind the controlled surface of him for the past 3 hours had moved closer to the surface. Not breaking through, but visible in the way the structure of something is visible beneath a thin material when light hits it at the correct angle. She could see the anger. Not the cold, managerial anger of the kitchen 3 days ago. Something older and more personal. This is my fault, he said. The statement was not made to the room. It was made with a precision that excluded everyone else to her. She stared at him. You've been in that building for 11 months. Vivian trusted you. The organization treated you like wallpaper. And someone used the fact that we had made you invisible to run an operation that I should have known about, through a person I should have been protecting. His voice was low and deliberate, each word placed with the care of someone who does not often make this kind of statement and is not making it for performance. They got to Marcus because of your connection to this household. That connection exists because of me. She did not say it wasn't his fault. It partially was. She did not say it was fine. It was not fine. She looked at him across the table in the shadowless light of a room built for difficult conversations, and she understood that they had arrived, without either of them navigating toward it deliberately, at the specific territory where operational facts and personal consequence become the same thing. Then fix it, she said. He held her gaze. Fix it, she said again. Find out who's running the counter-operation inside your building. Find out how deep the Vasquez infiltration goes. And find Reeves. She straightened up from the table. Her hands were not shaking. Her voice was not shaking. The thing that had replaced fear, she was discovering, was a particular species of fury that ran clean and cold and did not interfere with clear thinking. Because if they tried Marcus once, they'll try him again. And next time, they won't send a caseworker. The room was very still. Damien set the legal pad down. He looked at Kowalski. I want every vehicle in the fleet swept by noon. I want the cell tower data cross-referenced with staff schedules for the past 8 months. And I want someone I trust physically present at Hartwell until further notice. Kowalski nodded once and left the room. Damien looked back at Lena. You're not going back to your apartment. I know. You're not going back to the penthouse either. Not until we know the suite is clean. Where am I going? Somewhere I can guarantee. He said it without elaboration, the way he said things when he considered the elaboration to be self-evident, and she was too tired and too furious and too hollowed out by the past 6 hours to push for specifics she would receive in due course anyway. She sat back down in the chair. She looked at the surface of the table. She thought about 11 months of invisibility, the years of it, actually, the entire architecture of a life constructed around being the person who supports rather than the person who requires support, the person who notices rather than the person who is noticed. She had built that invisibility deliberately, stone by careful stone, because visibility had always cost more than she could afford. She thought about Vivian saying "I do." She thought about an anonymous channel sending photographs to the caregiver's phone because the caregiver was the only person in the building that no one was watching. She thought about Marcus in his room at Hartwell, unaware that a man with a false referral form had stood in the lobby 40 minutes ago asking for his room number, unaware that his sister was sitting in a converted warehouse on the near west side with her hands flat on a table trying to hold the shape of herself together through sheer muscular effort. Petra spoke. I have an ID on the detained caseworker. Real name is Fen Galloway. Freelance, 3 prior arrests for intimidation and coercion under contract. His last confirmed employer. She stopped. Something in the stop made Lena look up. Petra was reading her screen with the specific stillness of someone encountering information that requires recalibration. His last confirmed employer 18 months ago, she said carefully, was a private security firm called Ardent Risk Solutions. The name meant nothing to Lena. It meant something to Damien. She could tell because he stopped moving entirely. The particular cessation of motion that is its own form of response. The body's way of managing information it needs a full second to process before it can continue. Ardent Risk, he said. Yes. A silence. Ardent Risk was Carver's firm, he said, before I brought him in-house. The weight of what that meant settled across the room in layers, each one heavier than the last. Carver. Dead 6 weeks. Carver 9. The deactivated credentials used to modify the convoy route from inside the building. Carver, who had come from a private security firm that had just sent a man to a rehabilitation facility to locate Marcus Mercer's room number. Carver, who was dead, or who had been reported dead. Lena looked at Damien. She watched the thing move across his face again. Not the suppressed anger now, not the controlled assessment, but something rawer and more fundamental. The expression of a man who has just understood that the ground he believed he was standing on has not been ground at all, and the fall beneath it is considerably deeper than he had mapped. He's not dead, Damien said. Petra's fingers were already moving on the keyboard, pulling the incident report from 6 weeks ago, the one that generated the death record. She worked for 15 seconds. The report was filed by... She stopped again. The second stop was worse than the first. Filed by Reeves, she said. The room went entirely silent. Lena thought about Reeves, who was currently somewhere on the I-290 with 43 minutes head start. She thought about Carver 9, active from inside the building, using a dead man's credentials to modify a transfer route. Because the dead man wasn't dead, and someone who knew he wasn't dead had filed the death record that deactivated his credentials, and that same someone had just cleared out his apartment and run. 2 operations. She had thought there were 2 operations, the Vasquez infiltration and the internal counter-operation. She had thought Reeves was Vasquez, and the anonymous channel was the counter. But if Reeves had filed Carver's death record, and Carver was alive, and Carver's old firm had just moved against Marcus, it's not 2 operations, she said aloud. Damien looked at her. Reeves didn't file that death record to protect your organization from Carver. He filed it to protect Carver from you. She said it slowly, assembling it in real time, the pieces locking together with the horrible, irresistible momentum of a truth that has been present all along in the negative space of available information. Carver isn't working against the Vasquez syndicate from inside your organization. Carver is the Vasquez syndicate's asset. He's been inside your operation from the beginning. Reeves didn't betray you to the Vasquez people. They were both already there. The silence after this was of a different quality than any silence the room had previously held. And the anonymous channel, Damien said. His voice was very quiet now. The quiet of extreme compression. Someone else. A third party. Someone who knew about both Carver and Reeves, who knew the infiltration had been running for months, and who couldn't surface it through your security structure because your security structure was compromised. She looked at him. Someone who's been watching this whole time and chose the only clean conduit available. Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something in his face shifted. Not the suppressed anger, not the calculation, but a different register entirely, something she had not seen on this face before. He answered. He listened for 11 seconds. He said nothing. He lowered the phone. He looked at Lena with an expression she would spend a considerable amount of time afterward trying to fully understand. The expression of a man confronting the specific species of betrayal that destroys not because it is unexpected, but because it has been, in retrospect, exactly as expected as the most painful things always are. The anonymous channel, he said. Petra traced the originating device. Yes, Petra said. Her voice had gone very careful. Tell her whose it was. Petra looked at Lena. The device is registered to a burner purchased 8 months ago at a cash electronics vendor on Michigan Avenue. She paused. The vendor's security footage shows the purchase being made by a woman in her late 70s, small build, gray hair, using cash. Lena stared at her. The device has been pinging cell towers consistent with movement between a single north side high-rise and medical facilities in the Gold Coast area, Petra said. The high-rise is the Moreau residential building. Lena stopped breathing. It's Vivian, Damien said. And his voice, for the first time in the 11 months she had known him, sounded like something had broken inside it, cleanly and at the root, the way old wood breaks. Not with drama, but with the simple, structural finality of something that has been holding weight for too long and has finally, irrevocably, given. His mother had known about the infiltration for 8 months. His mother had been running a counter-operation from her sitting room. His mother had watched and waited, and chosen Lena as her instrument, not because Lena was nobody, but because Vivian Moreau had seen exactly who Lena was from the very first morning, and had understood that the most dangerous person in a building full of armed men was the one that no one was watching. And now Vivian was in a secured vehicle somewhere on the highway between Chicago and an estate whose location had been photographed from the staging room corkboard by a man who was currently in the wind, heading toward a destination that Carver, alive, embedded, 8 months deep inside the organization's infrastructure, already knew. Lena was already standing. The estate, she said, they know the location. Damien was already moving toward the door, and for the first time since she had known him, he was moving without the composure, without the managed, pressurized control that had always made him seem like a force of nature operating at a chosen frequency. And what replaced it was something she recognized from her own interior, from the 3 a.m. arithmetic sessions and the phone calls from Hartwell and the 11 months of quiet, accumulated terror of losing the one person she could not afford to lose. He was afraid. Not for his organization, not for his reputation or his territory or the operational integrity of his criminal empire. For his mother. And Vivian Moreau, 81 years old, 2 strokes, a velvet bag of letters she had never let anyone read, sitting in an armored vehicle headed toward a location that had been compromised before the convoy ever left the city, had known when she pressed Lena's hand in the suite that morning before the transfer and said, "I trust you," with a simplicity that had felt at the time like ordinary reassurance, that she was saying something else entirely. She had known what was coming. She had been preparing for it for 8 months, and she had placed the only bet she trusted in the hands of the woman her son had dismissed as nobody. The door of the warehouse swung open into gray November air. Damien was already at the vehicle. Lena ran. They drove north at 107 miles per hour, with 2 vehicles running interference and Damien on the phone the entire time, his voice stripped down to pure function. No inflection, no temperature, just directives delivered with the compressed urgency of someone who understands that every second of communication is a second not being used for something else. Lena sat in the back seat beside him and listened and understood approximately 60% of what was being communicated, which was enough. Enough to know that the convoy carrying Vivian had a 12-minute lead on them. Enough to know that the estate's perimeter security had not yet been alerted because the communication channel used to reach them ran through a coordination node that Petra was now not certain was clean. Enough to know that Carver, alive, operational, 8 months embedded, had last been placed by cell tower data in the vicinity of the estate's county road access point approximately 90 minutes ago. He was already there. He had been there before the convoy left Chicago. "Can you reach the convoy directly?" Lena said. Damien was already dialing. The call connected and held for 3 rings and went to an automated transfer message that meant the number had been rerouted, which meant the convoy's internal communication channel had been compromised at the routing level. He lowered the phone. He looked at it with an expression she had learned to read as the controlled processing of information that requires a structural response rather than an emotional one, and then he looked at Kowalski in the front passenger seat. "Secondary channel," Damien said. "Running it." The vehicle hit a highway seam at speed, and the chassis shuddered, and Lena put one hand flat against the door to stabilize herself and kept her eyes on the road ahead, on the gray November sky pressing down against the flat Illinois landscape, on the mile markers going past at a rate that her mind was automatically converting into time-to-destination calculations she could not afford to be wrong about. 11 minutes. At current speed, 11 minutes. The secondary channel connected. A man's voice, one of the senior security personnel riding with Vivian, a man named Garrett, whose voice she recognized from the penthouse hallways. "Go ahead." "Status," Damien said. 40 minutes from estate. No incidents. Mrs. Moreau is, stop the convoy right now. Pull off the road, full stop, and do not proceed to the estate." A pause. 2 seconds. "Sir, we're on a county road. There's no—" "I don't care where you stop. Stop." "What's the threat?" "Carver is alive and he's at the estate. Stop the vehicle." The pause this time was longer. She heard something in it. Not hesitation exactly, but the specific recalibration of a professional who has just received information that requires him to reorder everything he thought he knew about the current situation. "Stopping now," Garrett said. The line stayed open. She heard the deceleration of the convoy, heard, in the background, Vivian's voice asking a question that she couldn't make out, and Garrett's voice responding with the careful neutrality of someone managing a high-value principal's anxiety without feeding it. "Garrett," Damien said, "count your personnel. Everyone in both vehicles, I want a verbal confirmation." A pause. She heard Garrett move, heard him speak to someone, heard a response. Then, "Sir, I'm showing one personnel discrepancy. Vehicle 2 has a driver I don't—" A sound, a sharp compressed sound that was not a word and was not nothing, and then the line erupted into noise. Not gunfire. Not yet. Something worse in some ways, the noise of a contained space becoming suddenly violent, of bodies impacting surfaces, of a man's voice cutting off mid-sentence with the brutal efficiency of someone being prevented from continuing. Then silence on the line. Then a voice she did not recognize. Male, unhurried, with the flat effect of someone who has moved past the adrenaline phase of what they're doing into the colder territory on the other side of it. "Mr. Moreau, I think you know what this is." Damien's jaw was a single rigid line. "Let me talk to her." "In a moment." A pause. "You've been thorough today. Reeves, the device, the route. I want you to know I'm impressed. Genuinely." The voice had the particular quality of someone who means what they're saying and understands that meaning it makes it more threatening rather than less. "But you're 11 minutes away. I have 12 personnel at the estate, and your mother is right here in this vehicle. So I'd like you to consider very carefully what your next movement looks like. If you touch her, I'm not going to touch her. She's not the objective." A pause. "You know what the objective is." Damien said nothing. "Come to the estate. Come alone? Not alone. I know you won't come alone, but come with a manageable number. Come without the ambition of a firefight, because the first casualty of a firefight at this location will not be one of mine." Another pause. "You have 9 minutes now. The county road runs straight. You'll see the turn." The line went dead. The vehicle was silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then Damien said to Kowalski, "What do we have at the estate's perimeter?" 2 on the gate, 1 mobile patrol on the east side of the property. They're not Carvers. They've been on Moreau payroll for 2 years. "Can we reach them off the primary channel?" "Working on it." "Work faster." Lena looked at Damien. He was looking straight ahead through the windshield, and she could see the thing happening behind his eyes. The calculus, the operational mapping, the assessment of variables against outcomes in a situation where the margin for error was a woman in her 80s with a compromised heart and an intelligence operation she had been running alone for 8 months without telling her son. "How many does he actually have?" Lena said. Damien looked at her. "He said 12 at the estate. Is that realistic or is it leverage math?" A pause. "Carver ran a team of 8 at maximum operational capacity, adding Reeves and whatever Vasquez personnel he could mobilize in the window since this morning," he calculated. 7 to 10 is realistic. 12 is the ceiling. "And you have 6 in these 2 vehicles, 3 at the estate perimeter if Kowalski reaches them." He held her gaze. 9 against 10. In an environment they've had 90 minutes to prepare. She thought about this. He wants a negotiation. He wants a surrender. He wants something he can take back to the Vasquez syndicate as a win, because if he kills you and your mother without a deliverable, he's just created a war. But if he walks out of this with a signed concession on territory or operations, he's not getting a concession. "I know." She held his gaze. "I'm saying that's his objective, which means his interest is in keeping Vivian alive and functional until you arrive and agree to something. Which means the window between now and that agreement is the only window that exists." He looked at her for a moment with something in his expression she had seen once before, in the warehouse, when she had laid out the 2-operation theory and watched him recalibrate. The specific expression of a man who does not routinely encounter other people's thinking as a resource and is adjusting to the experience in real time. "What are you seeing?" he said. "The estate has a service access road on the north side. It's on the property documentation I reviewed when we were planning the original transfer route. There was a note about delivery access for the catering service used for the estate's event hosting." She looked at the road ahead. "Carver prepared for a direct approach from the county road. He's had 90 minutes to position for it. He hasn't had time to cover every access point on a property this size." Kowalski turned from the front seat. "The service road comes out behind the main structure. If we can get 2 personnel on foot from the tree line to the north—" "You'd need a diversion at the front gate," Damien said. "Yes. Which means a direct approach that looks like compliance." He looked at Lena. "Which means I have to look like I'm coming in to negotiate." The vehicle hit the county road and the quality of the sound changed. Asphalt to packed gravel, a rougher, more immediate surface that transmitted every imperfection directly through the chassis. The estate property appeared in the near distance, a 19th century main house in gray stone behind a tree line that had gone bare with November, the skeleton architecture of the trees making the structure behind them visible in sections and angles. A partial view of something large and old and, from this distance and this light, almost beautiful in its severity. Almost. Lena looked at it and thought about Vivian inside it. She thought about an 81-year-old woman who had bought a burner phone at a cash electronics vendor on Michigan Avenue and spent 8 months conducting a counterintelligence operation from her sitting room, watching her son's organization from the inside with the patient, undeceived eyes of someone who had been watching it for longer than most of its current personnel had been alive. Who had chosen Lena as her instrument not out of desperation but out of assessment, who had seen from the first morning something worth seeing. Damien's phone was to his ear again. He was giving coordinates to someone she hadn't heard him contact before. A third vehicle, she understood, that had been running on a parallel route since they left the city. 2 personnel moving toward the north side of the property on foot from the tree line. The plan had 4 minutes to work. They came through this main gate at reduced speed with both vehicles. And the gate personnel, Carver's, 2 men she had never seen before who stood with the particular stillness of people maintaining a performance of normalcy while something operational ran underneath it, waved them through with hand signals, and she sat in the back seat and kept her hands in her lap and breathed. The driveway curved through the bare tree line and the main house came into full view, and she saw the convoy vehicles, Vivian's armored transport, and the lead security car, parked at angles in front of the main entrance in the specific diagonal configuration of vehicles that have been stopped and repositioned by people other than their original drivers. She counted 4 visible personnel on the exterior. There would be more inside. Damien's vehicle stopped 20 meters from the entrance. He looked at Kowalski. Kowalski's phone showed a single text, in position. 2 minutes, Kowalski said. Damien opened the vehicle door. "Wait," Lena said. He looked at her. She did not know exactly what she was going to say until she said it, which was not how she usually operated. She was someone who considered language carefully, who measured it against the weight of what it needed to carry before deploying it. But there was no time for that, and the thing she felt in the particular compressed space of that moment was something too immediate for measured language. "He's going to put you in a room with his people and Vivian," she said. "And the room is the trap, not the negotiation. The room. Once you're inside with no sightlines to the exterior, the north side operation doesn't matter." He held her gaze. "I need to be inside before you are," she said. A pause. "You're the caregiver," she said. "Vivian needs her medication. It's been 4 hours since her last cardiac dose. That's verifiable. It's medically non-negotiable, and Carver is not going to let an 81-year-old woman with a compromised heart go into cardiac arrest in his custody because the optics of that are catastrophic for any negotiation." She held his gaze. "He'll let me through because I'm nobody." She held his. "Because I'm the caregiver and I have the medication case and I don't register as a threat. You're not trained for... I know." She looked at him without flinching. "I know exactly what I am and what I'm not. But I can tell you the layout of that house from the transfer planning documentation. I know which room they'll have put her in because it's the only ground floor room with 2 exits. And Carver is a security professional who thinks in exits. And I know Vivian's medical status well enough to communicate it credibly to anyone who asks." She paused. "Let me go in first. Give me 4 minutes. Then come through the front." Bon samats asui. He looked at her for what felt like a long time and was probably 6 seconds. "If something happens to you in there," he started. "Don't," she said, not unkindly. "We don't have time for that sentence." He closed his mouth. He looked at her with the expression she still didn't have a full name for. The one that had been developing since the overpass, since the warehouse, since she had held her phone up in the cold November air under a Chicago overpass and shown him a photograph and not looked away. He reached into his jacket and pressed something into her hand, small, flat, a panic transmitter the size of a thumb drive. "You press that and everyone moves," he said. "Don't wait for a clean moment. The second something's wrong." "I know." She got out of the vehicle. She pulled her coat straight. She picked up the medication case from the back seat. She had not let go of it through the entire drive, a fact she had not registered until this moment. And she walked toward the main entrance of the estate house in the gray November light, with her shoulders level and her pace measured and her heart doing something complicated and extremely loud inside her chest. The man at the door stopped her with a hand, not rough, but definitive. He looked at the medication case. "Cardiac medications," she said. "Mrs. Moreau is 4 hours past her last dose. If her heart goes into arrhythmia during whatever is happening in there, your boss's entire afternoon becomes significantly more complicated." The man looked at her. He spoke into an earpiece. He waited. He stepped aside. She went through. The entrance hall was a large, cold space. Stone floor, high ceilings. The furniture of a house used for events rather than habitation. Impersonal and slightly formal. 2 more personnel in the hallway. She walked past them toward the south corridor, which the estate documentation had shown as leading to the primary sitting room. The only ground floor room with access to both the main hallway and the service corridor that connected to the kitchen wing. She counted doors, she counted personnel, she counted the seconds. The sitting room door was open. Vivian was in a chair near the window. Of course she was. She was always in a chair near a window. This was simply where Vivian Moreau positioned herself in any room she occupied, with her hands in her lap and her posture so precisely maintained that it constituted, Lena understood, a form of defiance. Garrett was seated on a low bench against the wall, wrists bound with a cable tie, a cut above his left eye dark with dried blood. One of his security colleagues was beside him in the same condition. Carver was standing near the fireplace. She had built an image of him from 11 months of residual impressions. A name dropped without context, the deactivated credential, the dead man who was not dead. The image she had built was generic and cinematic, the way imagined people always are. The real Carver was 62 or 63, compact and deliberate in his movements, with the kind of face that communicated capability without communicating anything else. He had gray eyes. He looked at her the way he would look at a piece of equipment, assessing load-bearing capacity rather than character. The medication, Lena said. She did not look at Vivian. Not yet. If she looked at Vivian now, something in her face would happen that she couldn't afford. She needs it. Set it on the table, Carver said. It requires administration. It's not a pill. She held the medication case so he could see its dimensions. Too small for a weapon of any meaningful kind. Too familiar in design to read as anything other than what it was. 2 minutes. You can watch. A pause. He looked at the case. He looked at her. He made the assessment she had predicted he would make. Nobody. The caregiver, not a variable, and nodded once. She crossed the room to Vivian. She crouched beside the chair and opened the medication case, and finally, now that her back was partially to Carver, allowed herself to look at the old woman's face. Vivian looked back at her with eyes that were completely, utterly clear. Not frightened, not diminished. The eyes of someone who has been waiting for this specific moment with the patience of a person who scheduled it herself 8 months ago, when she purchased a burner phone at a cash electronics vendor on Michigan Avenue and began the long, quiet work of protecting her son from the inside of the cage he didn't know he was in. Lena pressed the cardiac medication applicator to the inside of Vivian's wrist with practiced efficiency. With the other hand shielded entirely by her body and the open lid of the medication case, she pressed the transmitter. "You're going to be all right," she said to Vivian. Quietly. For Carver's benefit, if he could hear it, a caregiver's reassurance, entirely consistent with her function. Vivian looked at her. Then barely perceptibly, the old woman's eyes moved. Not to Lena's face, but to a point over her left shoulder, a fractional directional signal so controlled that it communicated without constituting movement. Lena looked. In the reflection of the window glass behind Vivian's chair, she could see the sitting room door, still open. Could see the hallway beyond it. Could see the shadow of a man moving along the wall of the service corridor, moving fast and low with the trained economy of someone who has been given 4 minutes and is now in his third. One of Carver's personnel, positioned in the hallway, turned toward the service corridor. Lena stood up, turned, and walked directly into Carver. Not toward him, into him, deliberately, the medication case going wide as though she had lost her footing on the stone floor, her hand catching his forearm. Her whole body weight in his space for the 2 seconds it took the man in the hallway to turn back because there was nothing to see. Just the caregiver stumbling, the nobody, not a factor. Carver steadied her with both hands on her shoulders and pushed her back with the impersonal efficiency of someone removing an object from their path. And in his eyes she saw the first flicker of something. Not recognition exactly, but its precursor, the moment just before a man decides he has miscategorized something important. "Sit down," he said. She sat. The next 90 seconds happened in a compressed sequence that her memory would afterward preserve not as a linear narrative, but as a series of physical impressions, the sound of the service corridor door coming off its frame, which was not loud but was definitive in the way that structural failures are definitive. The coordinated entry of 2 personnel from the north, which she had planned for abstractly and which was, in immediate reality, faster and more violent than abstractions prepare you for. A man's voice shouting, one of Carver's, near the window, and the response to that shouting from the hallway, and the particular quality of the next few seconds during which every person in the room was operating on pure instinct rather than plan. She was on the floor. She did not remember going to the floor, but she was there, turned toward Vivian's chair, her body oriented between the chair and the room. And this orientation was also something that had not been decided in the planning sense, but had simply happened in the way that the body decides things when thought is not fast enough. Carver moved towards the exit. One of the North Entry personnel cut him off. Carver was fast, faster than his age suggested, with the speed of someone who has maintained physical capability as a professional obligation. And the exchange between them was brief and brutal, and not in Carver's favor, which she registered with a cold, specific relief. She heard Damien's voice in the hallway. Coming through the front, as planned, 3 minutes and 50 seconds after she'd gone in, which meant he had started earlier than she'd asked for, which meant the panic transmitter signal had moved the timeline, which meant he had not given her the full 4 minutes, which meant he had been watching from outside and had decided, at some point in the past 4 minutes, that he was not willing to wait. He came through the sitting room door with Kowalski and 2 others behind him, and he crossed the room in a way she would not have predicted. Not to Carver, who was already contained, not to Garrett or the other bound security personnel, but directly to the chair by the window, directly to his mother, going to his knees in front of her chair the way a man goes to his knees when he stops managing himself and simply responds. Vivian put one hand against the side of his face. "I'm fine," she said. "I've been fine." "You bought a burner phone," he said. His voice was not his operational voice, or his managerial voice, or any voice she had heard from him before. "You've been running an operation for 8 months. Someone had to. You should have told me. You would have stopped it. You would have tried to protect me from it." Her hand stayed against his face. "You don't protect me by keeping me in the dark, Damien. You've never understood that." The room was very still. Personnel were moving, securing Carver, checking the exterior, communicating through earpieces in clipped bursts. But the stillness at the center of the room, at the chair and the man on his knees before it, held its own gravity. Lena stood up from the floor. Her left knee had hit the stone at some point and was communicating its objection with increasing specificity. She moved to the window, away from the center of the room, because this was not a moment she was part of, and she knew how to not be part of a moment. She had been practicing it for 11 months. Then Vivian looked past her son and found Lena across the room. "Come here," Vivian said. Lena came. The old woman looked at her with the same clear, unfrightened eyes she had looked at her with over the medication case, and she took Lena's hand in both of hers the way she sometimes did in the mornings. Without asking, with the comfortable certainty of someone who has decided that physical reassurance is not a thing that requires permission between people who have been honest with each other. "I chose you," Vivian said quietly, "because you were the most capable person in that building. Not the most trained, not the most armed." She paused. "The most honest, the most awake, the most present." She pressed Lena's hand. "I'm sorry for what it cost you." Lena looked at her. She thought about Marcus, about the caseworker in the Hartwell lobby, about a burner phone in a velvet bag next to a silver-framed photograph and a cardigan, and the specific careful correspondence of a woman who had been doing what needed to be done for 8 months while her son built walls around her out of fear he called protection. "It's not over yet," Lena said. "Reeves is still out there." "I know," Vivian said. Damien rose from his knees. He looked at Lena. He looked at his mother. He looked at Carver, who was secured against the far wall, wrists bound, watching the room with gray eyes that had not lost their quality of assessment despite everything. "Carver," Damien said. He crossed the room. He stood in front of the man he had once trusted enough to bring in-house, the man whose reported death he had accepted without requiring verification, the man who had been inside his organization for 8 months with access to everything that mattered. "Where is Reeves?" Carver looked at him. He said nothing. Damien looked at him for a moment. Then he turned to Kowalski. "Put him in the vehicle." He turned back to Lena. Something was happening in his expression. The residual compression of the past 4 hours beginning, very slowly, to ease. The way a fist opens, not all at once, but finger by finger. "Reeves will surface," he said. "He has nowhere to go. The Vasquez Syndicate will distance themselves from him now that the operation is burned." He said it to the room, but he was looking at her. "It's done." She looked at him. She looked at the stone floor where she had been, at the window glass where she had seen the reflection of a shadow moving along a wall, at the chair by the window where Vivian sat with her hands folded and her posture maintained and her eyes clear and entirely undefeated. She thought, not quite done, because somewhere on the I-290 was a man who had her brother's name in his head and 11 months of accumulated information about her life in whatever device he was carrying, and the Vasquez Syndicate's survival instinct did not require its own operation to be successful. It required only that Moreau's cost-benefit calculation eventually tipped toward negotiation rather than retaliation. Reeves was not a loose end. Reeves was a message, and the message had not finished arriving yet. She felt it in the way she felt things, not as thought exactly, but as a physical alertness, a sharpening of the same instinct that had looked at a route modification at 4 a.m. and understood, before it could articulate the understanding, that something was wrong. She pressed the palm of her hand flat against her sternum, directly over the cardiac thud of her own heartbeat, and she breathed. Outside the estate windows, November had darkened by degrees into early afternoon, the particular gray giving way to a slightly deeper gray, the flat light redistributing itself across the bare trees, and the stone facade and the gravel of the drive where the vehicles sat at their functional, operational angles, waiting. Kowalski came back through the door. He looked at Damien. He said nothing, but the quality of his look communicated something specific, and Lena saw Damien read it the way people who have worked together for a long time read each other. Not in words. "What?" Damien said. "Reeves surfaced," Kowalski said. "Not on the expressway. Local cell tower put his phone active 40 minutes ago in the south side." A pause. "2 blocks from Hartwell." The room stopped. Lena's hand was still flat against her chest. She felt her own heartbeat change, felt it accelerate with the specific, clean, furious velocity of someone who has run a very long race and can see the finish line and understands that someone has moved it. She looked at Damien. He was already looking at her, and his face in that moment contained something that had not been there that morning in the kitchen when he had told her that the caregiver doesn't talk to security, and the caregiver doesn't talk to logistics, and the caregiver cares, something that had been built piece by piece across 11 months of invisibility and 4 hours of the most visible morning of her life. "Your people," she said, "at Hartwell. Are they still there?" "2 are still on site," Kowalski said. "But Reeves will know that. He'll have a counter." She looked at Damien. He looked at her. The distance between them in the sitting room of the gray stone estate house was approximately 8 feet and contained, she felt, the entire compressed weight of everything that had happened since 4:47 that morning. The route summary, the overpass, the warehouse table, his hand closing briefly over hers as he took her phone, his voice breaking along a single word when Petra told them about the burner and what it meant. "Then we go," she said. He didn't hesitate. "We go," he said, and for the first time since she had known him, the word "we" arrived in his voice without the operational modifier that usually preceded it. Not the organizational "we," not the hierarchical "we," but the raw, unhedged, two-person pronoun of people who have decided, without discussing the decision, that they are in the same place and moving in the same direction, and that this is no longer a temporary arrangement. She was already walking toward the door when the first sound reached them from outside. Not a vehicle, not a voice, but the particular compressed crack of a firearm discharged at close range in the open air, followed immediately by a second, and then a silence that had a different quality than any silence that had preceded it. She stopped. She turned. Through the sitting room window, across the gray gravel of the estate drive, she could see Kowalski's vehicle, the one they had arrived in, the one idling 20 meters from the entrance. She could see the driver's door open. She could see a man she recognized as one of Damien's perimeter personnel on the ground beside it. She could see, standing at the vehicle's rear, a figure in a dark jacket with a phone to his ear and a firearm in his other hand, looking directly at the sitting room window with the particular quality of someone who is exactly where he intended to be. Reeves had not gone to Hartwell. He had sent someone to Hartwell to make them think he had gone to Hartwell, and he had come here, and he had waited, and he had watched them bring Carver out and load him into the vehicle, and now he was standing in the gravel drive of the estate with a phone and a gun, and the expression of a man who has one remaining option and has decided, with the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose, to use it completely. Through the window glass, across 20 meters of gray November air, Reeves raised the firearm, not toward the window, toward the vehicle where Carver was secured in the back seat, where the only person who could corroborate the full operational history of the Vasquez infiltration was sitting with his wrists bound and his gray eyes watching whatever was about to happen with the professional calm of someone who has accepted that some outcomes cannot be managed from the position he currently occupies. Lena understood what she was seeing, understood it completely in the single second before it resolved. Reeves eliminating the last witness, eliminating the evidentiary thread that connected him to Carver, and Carver to the Vasquez syndicate, and the Vasquez syndicate to 8 months of embedded operations inside the Moreau organization. Reeves eliminating his own testimony. She was through the sitting room door before she had decided to move. She cleared the front entrance at a run, and the cold hit her like a wall. November air, the particular dead cold of a gray afternoon that has used up whatever warmth it started with. And she was across the stone steps and onto the gravel before the operational logic of what she was doing fully articulated itself, which was, Reeves could not shoot Carver if there was a body between Reeves and the vehicle. She was the body, not because she had calculated it, because she was someone who moved toward the thing that needed to be moved toward. And she had always been that person. And 11 months of invisibility had not changed it, and 4 hours of the most violent morning of her life had not changed it. And the only thing that had changed was that now, running across gray gravel toward a man with a firearm, she understood this about herself with a clarity that felt, in its own terrible way, like the first completely honest self-knowledge she had possessed in years. Reeves saw her. His expression in the half-second before everything changed was not what she expected. Not contempt, not dismissal, not the reflexive categorization of a nobody. It was surprise, genuine, unmanaged surprise, the expression of a man who had planned for every variable and had not planned for the caregiver. She was 4 feet from the vehicle when he adjusted his aim, not toward Carver anymore, toward her. She heard Damien's voice behind her, her name, a single syllable, his voice stripped to something that had no operational register at all, no composure, no management, just the raw and unmediated sound of a person watching something they cannot stop. She heard boots on gravel, multiple sets, converging from different angles. She heard Reeves make a decision, heard it in the quality of the silence that preceded the sound, that half-breath pause that the body takes before committing to an irreversible action. She threw herself left, and the first shot went wide, and she hit the gravel on her right side, and the second shot did not go wide. She felt it before she heard it, and she heard it before she understood it, and she understood it before the pain arrived, which took approximately 2 seconds and then arrived comprehensively. Her left shoulder. The physical logic of it was simple and catastrophic. She was on the gravel, and she could not get up, and the cold was coming up through the stone and through her coat, and she could hear everything with extraordinary clarity. The third shot, fired by someone else, not by Reeves, the sound of a man going down, the crunch of boots, voices overlapping, someone's hands on her shoulder, on her neck, checking pulse, checking damage, saying something into an earpiece with the controlled urgency of someone who has been trained to manage this specific category of crisis. Kowalski's hands. She stared at the sky. Gray, completely, thoroughly gray. She thought about the water stain on her ceiling at 4:47 in the morning, which felt like a different geological era. Lena. Damien's voice. Close. Very close. She moved her eyes, and he was there, on the gravel beside her, and whatever had been left of his composure when he said, "We go," was entirely gone now, stripped down to something she had never seen on this face, something that looked, without any performance or management, like fear. "Look at me. Look at me." "I'm looking at you," she said. Her voice was strange to her. Thin, slightly airless, the voice of someone working around something new and intrusive in her chest. "Don't," he started and stopped, and she saw him do the thing she had watched him do all morning. Manage himself, contain himself, find the functional register, and fail. Fail completely. His hand was against the side of her face, which was where Vivian had put her hand against his face in the sitting room, and the symmetry of this was something she would think about later, in a different room, in different circumstances. "Stay still. Don't move. Kowalski has medical—" "Reeves," she said. "Down." "Dead?" A pause. "No." "You need him alive," she breathed. The breathing required attention now. "He's the corroborating testimony. Without him, Carver's the only witness, and Carver's your enemy. You need Reeves talking." "I know." His hand was still against her face. She could feel the warmth of it against the cold that was coming up from the gravel, and she stayed very still and let herself feel it, which was something she had not given herself permission to do since approximately 4 a.m., and which required now a different quality of permission. "Lena, I need you to stop talking and let Kowalski." "He'll need immunity," she said, "from law enforcement, which means you need someone in the federal structure who will deal, which means this goes above the organizational level, which means, Lena, you have 5 bullets in you and you're on the ground doing operational planning." His voice broke on the last 2 words, just slightly, just enough. "Stop." She stopped. She looked at the gray sky. She thought about 5 bullets, which was a piece of information her body was providing her with, through an increasingly insistent series of physical signals that she was choosing, for the moment, not to fully register. She thought about Marcus. She thought about Hartwell and the false caseworker and Damien's people in the lobby. And she thought about a 15-second phone call she had not yet been able to make. "Marcus," she said, "he's safe. I have confirmation from 20 minutes ago. He's in his room. He doesn't know any of this happened." His thumb moved against her cheekbone. One small movement. "He's fine." She let out a breath that she had been holding, she realized, since Petra had said Hartwell Recovery Center in the warehouse on the near west side, which meant she had been holding it for the better part of 2 hours. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said, which was not a word she had heard him use before. Not like this, not with this quality. Quiet and specific and addressed to her rather than to the room. Then Kowalski was there with the medical kit, and she stopped being able to track the sequence of events with the same granular attention, because pain has its own organizational logic, and it had begun, at this point, to impose that logic on everything else. She stayed conscious for the helicopter. She knew it was a helicopter because of the sound and because someone told her, and she registered Damien's presence beside her in the way you register constant things. Not as distinct events, but as a continuous condition of the environment, like temperature or light. She was not conscious for what came after the helicopter. She was not conscious for 9 days. She learned this afterward. 9 days, which was how long the surgery and its complications and the managed unconsciousness that followed it lasted before her body, apparently, decided it had done what it needed to do and was prepared to resume the business of keeping her informed. She woke up at 6:14 in the morning, which she knew because the room had a clock on the wall at the angle her eyes went to first, and she lay still for several minutes absorbing the information that she was in a room that was not her apartment and not the penthouse and not the estate house. White walls. Medical equipment she recognized from professional familiarity. Lights dialed to the low setting reserved for sleeping patients, which meant someone had set them that way for her and not simply left them at the default. There was a chair beside the bed. Vivian was in it. The old woman was asleep, which meant she did not immediately know that Lena was awake, and Lena spent several minutes simply looking at her. The precise maintenance of her posture even in sleep, the silver hair, the hands folded in her lap with their deliberate stillness. She had aged, Lena thought, or perhaps the quality of the room's light simply clarified things that the penthouse's warmer tones had softened. Either way, she looked, in sleep, like someone who had spent considerable energy on something important and was resting in the aftermath with the specific exhaustion of the genuinely spent. Lena moved her hand. The movement required more effort than expected and produced a sharp communique from her left shoulder that she received and filed. Vivian's eyes opened. The old woman looked at her for a moment without moving, the way people look when they're establishing that what they're seeing is real and not an extension of a dream. "Good morning," Lena said. Her voice was worse than it had been on the gravel. Dry, thin, worn from disuse. Vivian pressed the call button on the arm of the chair without looking away from Lena's face. Then she stood, slowly, and came to the edge of the bed, and she put her hand against Lena's forehead the way she sometimes put her hand against Lena's forehead during the morning routine, not checking temperature but simply making contact, the gesture of someone for whom touch is its own language and always has been. "You gave us quite a time," Vivian said. "I gathered." 9 days. Someone told me. "You kept almost coming back and then going away again." A pause. Damien did not sleep for the first 4. Lena looked at the ceiling. It was smooth and white and had no water stains. "Where is he?" "Running his empire from the corridor where he has been since they made him stop running it from this room." Vivian's hand moved from her forehead. She sat on the edge of the bed in the careful way she sat on edges, managing her weight with the practiced economy of someone who has made peace with the mechanics of her own body. The doctors became very firm about visiting hours. He became very firm about being an exception. The doctors lost. Lena thought about this. She thought about Damien Moreau in a hospital corridor with a phone and a legal pad, conducting the operational affairs of a criminal organization from outside a room where a caregiver from the South Side was not waking up on schedule. She tried to hold the image and found it would not resolve into anything ironic or absurd. It simply was what it was. He found out about Marcus, she said. About all of it. He found out about quite a lot, Vivian said. He has had 9 days to find out. He is thorough when he is motivated. She folded her hands in her lap. He knows about your mother, about the accident, about what you did with the money you should have been living on. She paused. He cried once. I am telling you this because he would not tell you himself. And I think you should know. Lena was quiet for a moment. You should have told me, she said, what you knew, what you were doing with the channel. I know. I could have prepared. You would have prepared. Vivian looked at her steadily. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. If you had known you were part of an operation, you would have behaved like someone who knew they were part of an operation. And the reason it worked was that you behaved like yourself. She paused. Like someone who pays attention because it is simply what she does, not because she has been asked to. Another pause. I used you, Lena. I am not going to apologize for it because the result was that Damien is alive, and Carver is in custody, and the Vasquez infiltration has been dismantled. But I am aware of what it cost you, and I am sorry for the cost. The door opened. A nurse, responding to the call button, came in and performed a series of checks with efficient cheerfulness and went back out. And in the wake of her departure, the room settled back into its particular quality of morning quiet. Reeves, Lena said. In federal custody. He talked for approximately 47 hours from what I understand. Vivian's voice was entirely dry. Damien had a conversation with a federal contact who was motivated to listen. The Vasquez syndicate's operations across 4 states have been significantly disrupted. 3 of their senior people were indicted last week. She smoothed her skirt across her knees. Reeves will serve time, less than he deserves, more than he was expecting. Carver, also federal custody, also talking, though less cooperatively. He'll serve considerably more. A pause. The death record Reeves filed has been officially vacated. There was a period of bureaucratic comedy around that. Lena almost smiled. And your building. Clean, swept twice. The pharmacy delivery protocol has been replaced entirely. The security structure has been rebuilt from the personnel level. Vivian looked at her hands. Damien did all of this from the corridor outside this room. Lena was quiet for a moment. She looked at the clock. 6:31. Through the room's single window, she could see the beginning of a gray morning. Still November, she gathered, or possibly December now. The same quality of light she had left when she went down on the gravel, as though the world had held its weather in reserve while she was absent. I want to see Marcus, she said. He is coming this afternoon. Damien sent a car for him this morning. Vivian looked at her with the expression she used when she was communicating something that she considered self-evident and is offering the other person the courtesy of discovering it independently. He has been informed, carefully, about what happened, not about everything. He knows you were hurt. He knows you are better. She paused. He sounded, from what Damien said, like a young man who has spent considerable time being cared for by someone else and has not previously understood the full weight of what that meant. Mom? She. Lena looked at the ceiling again. She breathed. The breathing still required some attention, but less than it had on the gravel, less than it had in the helicopter, and the trajectory of that improvement was something her body was tracking with quiet, dogged insistence. She thought about 4 years, about the payment schedules and the deferred admissions, and the bus rides, and the pressed wood dresser, and the one working burner. She thought about what it felt like to make a decision so early and so completely that it stopped being a decision and became simply the architecture of your life, the load-bearing wall you built everything else around. She thought about whether she regretted any of it. She thought about Marcus in his room, about the particular version of him that the accident had produced. Quieter, more careful with his words, a man who had come through something that should have ended him and had come through it changed rather than destroyed. She thought about a phone call she made every morning from a studio apartment on the south side, checking the single metric that told her whether the night had been acceptable or catastrophic. No, she thought, not any of it. The door opened again. Damien stood in the doorway. He was not in the fitted jacket. He was in a dark sweater, sleeves pushed to the forearm, the way they had been at the warehouse table, which meant this was apparently how he existed outside his operational presentation, and she was apparently now someone who observed his operational presentation and its absence. He had not shaved in what appeared to be several days. He looked, she thought, approximately like a man who had been running a criminal empire from a hospital corridor for 9 days without sleeping properly, which was accurate. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that she had enough context now to read completely. No residual ambiguity, no missing register. She could read all of it. "Go away, Damien," Vivian said pleasantly. "We are not finished." "Yes, you are," he said, and came in. Vivian stood from the edge of the bed with the unhurried dignity of someone who has made her exit on her own terms. She touched Lena's hand once as she passed. She looked at her son as she went by him with the expression of a woman who knows exactly what she has arranged and considers it good work. The door closed behind her. Damien stood at the edge of the bed. He looked at her the way he had looked at her on the gravel, with the composure still absent and apparently not yet reinstated. And she understood that the 9 days had done something to the management structure he had maintained for however many years he had maintained it, and that she was looking at what existed underneath it, which was more than she had expected and less defended than she would have predicted. "You should have stayed inside," he said. "You should have given me the 4 minutes." A pause. "You pressed the transmitter after 90 seconds. Something felt wrong. Something was wrong. You were in a room with Carver." He pulled the chair Vivian had been in closer to the bed and sat down. He sat the way he sat at operational tables, forward, deliberate, but without the legal pad, without the phone, without any of the equipment of management. "I watched you walk in there, through the window. I watched you cross the room to her." She looked at him. And I gave you 3 minutes and 50 seconds. His jaw was tight, which was approximately 3 minutes and 50 seconds longer than I was inclined to give you. She thought about what to say and settled on honesty, which was the register she defaulted to when she was too tired for anything else. "Vivian chose me because I pay attention, not because I'm brave or trained or capable of anything that happens in rooms like the one at the estate, just because I notice things and I act on what I notice." She paused. "That's all I did. On the gravel, in the building, at 5 in the morning with the route summary. I noticed something was wrong and I did something about it." She looked at him. "That's not heroism. That's just being awake." He looked at her for a long moment. "I've had people around me my entire adult life who were trained for every contingency I could identify. Vetted, tested, armed." He paused. "And the thing that broke 2 infiltration operations and saved my mother's life was a caregiver from the South Side who couldn't sleep and looked at a route summary at 5 in the morning. To be fair," she said, "your mother helped." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but its immediate precursor, the expression that occupies the same territory. It was the first time she had seen anything in that territory on this face, and it did something to the shape of the room that she didn't have precise language for. "Yes," he said. She did. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the gray morning was lightening by degrees, the flat November light redistributing itself across the glass with the indifferent persistence of weather that is not performing for anyone. "Marcus's debt," he said, "at Hartwell. The outstanding balance and the continuation of his treatment program through the end of next year. That's done. It was done 3 days into... while you were..." He stopped. Restarted. "I should have asked you. I didn't ask you. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know before you decide whether you're angry about it." She looked at him. She thought about $18,000 and the payment schedule that ran through April and the contingency plan she had never managed to build. She thought about what it felt like to carry a weight for long enough that you stopped noticing it as weight and experienced it simply as gravity, as the basic condition of being upright. "I'm not angry," she said. "I also paid 3 months on your apartment." He held her gaze. "Your landlord was going to... It had been 9 days and your rent... I know when my rent is due." "Yes." A pause. "I know you know." She looked at him. She understood that he was a man who had spent his adult life in a world where resources were deployed as control and obligation, where financial action was a form of leverage, and that he was attempting to do something different with these particular actions and was not entirely certain he was succeeding, and that the uncertainty was genuine and not performed. "Thank you," she said. Just that. He nodded once. His hands were on his knees and she looked at them. The same hands that had taken her phone on the overpass, that had pressed the transmitter into her palm outside the estate, that had been against her face on the gravel. And she thought about the specific quality of trust that gets built not through intention, but through accumulation, through the slow addition of small, honest moments, until the total weight of them becomes something structural. "I went through your personnel file," he said, "what the agency had, and then I had Petra go further." He paused. "You deferred nursing school twice. The second deferral was 3 weeks after your mother died." He looked at her. "There's still a program. At Northwestern. The admissions director was amenable to a conversation." She stared at him. "I'm not paying for it," he said quickly. "I want to be clear. That's not. There's a scholarship mechanism. Based on your caregiving record and your prior admission. Petra found it. The application requires someone who knows your professional history to provide a statement." He held her gaze. "My mother has already written it." She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the clock. She looked at the window and its gray and persistent light. She thought about 23 years old in a hospital waiting room, being told that the surgery had gone as well as could be expected, which was not well, and making a decision in that waiting room that she had not examined since because examining it would have required energy she needed for other things. She thought about what it felt like to imagine a different version of the next 5 years. Not the version built around Marcus's schedule and Hartwell's billing cycles, and the one working burner and the bus at 6:02. A version with a different architecture. A version with its own load-bearing wall built from something other than obligation. "That's a very large thing," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm aware. I'm not going to decide about it right now. I know." He did not press. She registered this, filed it in the same place she filed the 3 minutes and 50 seconds, the hand against her face, the quiet 2-letter pronoun in the estate sitting room. "You have time." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Outside the window, the gray was shifting, barely, incrementally, the way gray shifts in November when the morning has run out of reasons to stay dark and begins, without commitment, to allow something lighter. "Vivian," she said, "her cardiac situation, the stress of the past weeks, her recovery schedule needs to be rebuilt from the baseline. She'll need consistent monitoring for at least 2 months, and the physical therapy protocol needs adjustment." She paused. "Whoever takes over her care will need to be briefed very specifically." He was quiet. "I'm not going back as the caregiver," she said. She said it clearly, without apology, which was the way things required to be said when they were true. "That's finished. Whatever comes next, the program or something else. I'm not going back to invisible." "No," he said. "You're not." The simplicity of it settled in the room between them like something put down after long carrying. Not a concession, not a negotiation, just the acknowledgement of a fact that had been true since 4:47 in the morning 11 months ago and had simply required the appropriate conditions to become visible. "But Vivian's care," she said, "will be handled, properly, with someone I will actually evaluate before hiring." A pause. "Which I should have done the first time." "The agency's vetting is insufficient," he said. "Evidently." She almost smiled. "Evidently." Marcus arrived at 2 in the afternoon, brought by one of Damien's drivers who had apparently been instructed to treat the journey with the same logistical care applied to protected transfers, which Marcus had found, he told her afterward, both flattering and alarming. He came through the door slowly. He moved slowly now, with the careful deliberateness of someone managing the long aftermath of a repaired spine. And he stopped when he saw her, and his face did the thing that Marcus's face did when he was managing something large and not entirely succeeding. He was taller than she remembered. She always forgot, between visits, how tall he had gotten in the years since the accident, as though the rehabilitation had returned him to a height she had stopped expecting. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her bed, and they looked at each other for a moment with the specific, economical honesty of two people who have been each other's entire immediate world for 4 years and have developed the communication patterns that that kind of proximity produces. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you." I mean it. You look like you got shot. Accurate. He looked at her. His jaw was working the way their mother's jaw had worked when she was managing something she needed a moment to absorb. The guy who came to Hartwell. The caseworker. You knew about that. Damien told me, today, before we drove. He looked at his hands. He told me everything, or most of it. He looked back at her. Lena, this whole time you've been in the middle of, I know. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know any of it was happening. I just thought you had a job. He stopped. I thought you had a boring, quiet job. I thought so too, she said. For most of it. He was quiet for a moment, then, the money. For Hartwell. He told me about that too. Marcus, I'm not saying anything bad about it. He stopped again. He had gotten better at stopping when the sentence he was building wasn't going to arrive at the right place. I'm going to be done with the program in 7 months. The doctor says the physical maintenance after that is something I can manage outpatient, cheaply. He looked at her. I want you to know that there's an end to it, that it's not, he gestured at the room, at her, at the undefined space of what had happened, that this isn't what it costs forever. She looked at her brother. She looked at the careful way he sat, the way he measured his movements, the way he said things now with the deliberate honesty of someone who had spent 4 years in rooms designed to produce exactly that quality. She thought about a photograph on a windowsill in a studio apartment on the south side, checked every morning like a wound. I know, she said. I know it's not forever. He reached over and put his hand over hers, the way she had put her hand over his through 4 years of medical waiting rooms and facility visits and phone calls from the 602 bus. The gesture, in this direction, had a different weight, not heavier, but differently distributed, the weight of something being returned rather than given. They stayed that way for a while. December moved through the window by degrees. The gray shifted and occasionally lightened and occasionally produced a thin, unconvincing sunshine that lasted an hour and was replaced by more gray. And Lena spent 3 weeks in the room and then 2 weeks in a recovery suite that Damien had arranged in the same facility, which she argued about briefly and then accepted because she was tired and because the alternative was the South Side apartment with the one working burner and the stuck dresser drawer and the water stain on the ceiling, and she had enough honesty left to acknowledge that she was not yet ready for that. Vivienne visited every other day. They played cards, which Lena was bad at, and Vivienne was lethal at, and they talked in the comfortable, non-sequential way they had always talked, subject to subject, time to time, with the elastic grammar of people who have established enough shared reference that chronology is optional. Damien came in the evenings, after whatever the day had required of him was finished. He did not always stay long. Sometimes he sat in the chair beside the bed and worked on his phone while she read, which was a different quality of presence than she had experienced from him before. Not operational, not evaluative, just present. The way a person is present when they have decided that being in a room with another person is sufficient reason to be in the room. She did not always talk to him, and he did not always talk to her, and neither of them seemed to find this insufficient. One evening in the 3rd week, he brought a folder. He set it on the bedside table without comment, and she looked at it, and he looked at his phone, and after a while she picked it up. Northwestern. The nursing program. A scholarship application, partially completed in Petra's characteristically economical handwriting, with a note attached in different handwriting, older, more deliberate, with the specific flourish of someone who learned to write in an era when handwriting was a form of presentation. Vivienne's statement, 4 paragraphs. She read it once, and then a second time, and then she set the folder back on the table and looked at the window. You don't have to, Damien said. He was still looking at his phone. I know. There are other options. If the program isn't, it's the right program, she said. It was always the right program. She paused. I just need to sign the application. He looked up from his phone. He looked at her with the expression she had named, finally, in the 2nd week of her recovery. Not assessment, not evaluation, not the managed presentation of a man operating at chosen frequency. Just looking. The unmediated, unadministrated act of one person looking at another person and letting what they see simply be what it is. Okay, he said. She signed the application. She did it that evening with Damien's pen, a good pen, heavy and balanced, the kind of pen belonging to someone who signs documents that matter, sitting up in the hospital bed with the folder on her knees, and she did not think about the 23-year-old in the waiting room who had made a different decision. She thought about what was possible from here, from this room, from this page with her name on it in ink that was still drying. She thought about being awake, about what it cost and what it was worth. She handed the folder back to him. He looked at the signature without commenting on it and closed the folder and set it on the table and looked at her. "I'm going to want updates," she said, "on Vivian's care situation. Whoever you hire, I want the medication schedule reviewed by someone qualified before it's implemented." Noted. And the physical therapy protocol needs a qualified assessment, not just whoever the facility recommends. Also noted. "I'm not managing it," she said. "I'm just noting that it needs to be managed correctly. Lena." He said her name with the quality it had been developing over the past weeks. Not the operational identifier, not the instruction concluding address, just her name, in his voice, with nothing attached to it except the fact of her. "I know." She looked at him. She thought about a building full of men in fitted jackets who had moved around her for 11 months like water around a stone, and about an old woman in a chair by an east window who had seen through all of it from the first morning and had waited, with the patience of someone who understands that the right moment is not an accident but an accumulation, for the circumstances that would allow what she had seen to become visible to everyone else. She thought about 5 in the morning and a route summary and a water stain on a ceiling. She thought about standing in a doorway with 2 men who were looking at her for the first time with something that was not dismissal, and the feeling of that, which had been, at the time, more frightening than anything that came after. She thought about what it cost to be seen, what it cost to stop arranging yourself for invisibility. She thought about Marcus's hand over hers, about Vivian's handwriting on 4 paragraphs, about a pen balanced in her hand and a signature still drying. Outside the window, Chicago held its winter in its characteristic style, flat, honest, unimpressed with itself. The city did not perform for the season. The lake went its own gray and the streets continued their business, and the lights came on at the same hour they always came on, and the 6:02 bus ran its route, whether or not the woman who had taken it every morning for 11 months was available to take it. Damien was still in the chair. He would leave when he left, and she would sleep when she slept, and Marcus would call in the morning the way he had been calling every morning since December began, early, before the facility's breakfast service, in the window when he had the phone to himself, and the conversation could be as long as it needed to be. She would not be invisible again. She had not decided this as a resolution or an intention. It was simply a fact she had arrived at through the accumulated evidence of what visibility had produced, what it had cost, what had been waiting on the other side of it for 11 months, while she had been somewhere quieter and smaller and safer. She was not the woman who had dressed in the dark on a November morning and taken the 6:02 bus to a building where no one would learn her last name. That woman was not gone. She had built her, stone by stone, and the building was not something to be discarded. But she was not only that. She had never been only that. Vivian had known. And now everyone did. She leaned back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling of a room that had no water stains, and for the first time in as long as she could locate in memory, she let the silence around her simply be what it was. Not the silence of someone making herself small, not the silence of someone waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Just quiet. Just the ordinary, honest quiet of an evening that had nothing left to prove. Outside, the city continued. Inside, that was enough.